Cowboy found a mail-order bride with a bruised face and a secret. He said, "You're safe now." The first thing Luke Harper noticed was not the bruise on her face. It was the way she stepped off the stagecoach like she was walking into a place where pain might already be waiting for her. She came down slow, one hand tight on the rail, the other clutching a worn brown bag to her chest, as if everything she owned in this world could fit inside it. Then she lifted her head, and the late afternoon sun touched the dark mark along her cheekbone. Blue and yellow, old enough to be fading, fresh enough to still tell the truth. Luke stood in the dust of the Arizona station and felt something hard settle deep in his chest. It was the spring of 1884 in Dry Creek, a small cattle town west of Tucson where the wind always carried dust and the days felt longer than they should. Luke had come in his clean shirt and good boots, though both now felt foolish on him. He was a rancher, broad-shouldered and quiet, a man better with horses than with words. He had not come looking for beauty or romance. He had written for a wife because the silence in his house had turned heavy, and because after years of talking only to cattle, weather, and the empty chair across his supper table, he had begun to fear that one day he would forget how to live among people at all. The station yard was nearly empty except for the driver, the post clerk, and two boys chasing each other near the water trough. Luke had been waiting almost an hour, his hat turning in his hands until the brim had gone soft. He had read Clara Bennett's last letter so many times he could hear the words in her voice. She had written carefully, the way people write when they are trying not to take up too much space. She had said she could cook, sew, and keep a home. She had said she did not mind hard work. At the end she had written, "I only hope I will not disappoint you, Mr. Harper." That line had stayed with him. Now she was here. The driver tossed down a small trunk and then handed Luke a folded paper. "Came with her things," he said, "from back east." Luke opened it at once. The paper held only one line, "She lies. Don't trust a word she says." He read it once, then folded it and slid it deep into his pocket. When he looked up, Clara Bennett was standing still in the dust, waiting without speaking. She looked no older than 24. Her dress was plain gray calico, clean but worn at the cuffs. Her hair was pinned back too tightly as if loose strands were not allowed. Her face was pale beneath the bruise, and her eyes did not rest anywhere for long. They moved from the horses to the station door to Luke's hands, always measuring, always careful. Luke stepped toward her slowly. "Miss Bennett." Her shoulders stiffened. He stopped a few feet away and lowered his voice. "I'm Luke Harper." She gave one small nod but did not offer her hand. Luke looked at her bag. "I can take that if you'd like." For a moment she held on tighter. Then, as if reminding herself she had come too far to turn back now, she let him take it. It was lighter than he expected. He carried it to the wagon and set it down gently. The bruise pulled at him. The note in his pocket pulled harder, but he asked about neither. "It's about an hour to the ranch," he said. "Road's rough in spots, but the mare knows it." She climbed into the wagon without help and sat as close to the far edge as she could. Luke got in beside her, leaving enough space for air and comfort. The sun was sinking low when they left Dry Creek behind. The town disappeared fast, swallowed by open land, brush, and the long orange light stretching across the desert. For a while the only sound was the wagon wheels and the leather harness creaking with each step of the mare. Clara sat straight, hands locked in her lap. Once when the wagon struck a stone, she flinched so hard her breath caught. Luke saw it without turning his head. "Bad patch here," he said quietly. "Hold the rail." She did. A mile later he offered her the canteen. She looked at it, then at him, like kindness was a language she had forgotten how to speak. At last she took it, drank a little, and handed it back with a whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was soft but not weak. It sounded like something that had been pressed down for a long time and was still trying to remember its shape. Luke kept his eyes on the road. "You hungry? I made stew this morning. It'll still be fine." That seemed to surprise her more than anything else. "You cook?" "When I have to." A faint change touched her face. Not a smile, something smaller, something that wanted to be one. By the time they reached the ranch, twilight had settled over the land. Luke's place was simple: a weathered house, a red barn, a corral, and fields stretching dark and quiet beyond. He climbed down first and carried her bag to the porch. Inside, lamplight warmed the front room. The table had been scrubbed. Fresh curtains hung in the kitchen window, plain but clean. On the small bed in the back room lay a folded quilt and a bar of new soap. Beside the wash basin sat a jar with 2 yellow wildflowers he had picked that morning because empty rooms looked less empty when something alive was in them. Clara stood in the doorway, staring. Luke set her bag down near the bed. "You can have this room. There's a bolt on the door." He cleared his throat. "I'll sleep in the barn loft for now." She looked at him then, really looked at him. Her eyes moved over his face like she was searching for the catch in his words. "For now," she said. Luke rested one hand on the doorframe. "Until you feel settled. This house doesn't need to be anything you're afraid of." Something in her face shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the sharp edge of fear loosened just enough to let in breath. Then her hand rose slowly to her collarbone. Beneath the fabric, she touched something hidden there, something hanging on a chain under her dress. Her fingers pressed it tight for just a second before dropping away. That was when Luke knew the bruise was not the only thing she had brought with her. He stepped back toward the hall. "I'll put supper on the stove, you take your time." At the door he paused, then said the words that came to him without thought, quiet and steady as if they had been waiting all day to be spoken. "You're safe now." Clara did not answer, but after he left the room, he heard the bolt slide into place, and behind that sound came something even quieter. A woman crying like she had finally reached a place where no one could hear her, thought for a couple of seconds. Morning came slowly over the Harper ranch, spilling pale gold across the dry grass and the fence posts one by one. Luke had been awake long before sunrise. He sat on the porch step with a tin cup of coffee cooling in his hands, listening to the quiet. The house behind him was still. He had heard no sound from Clara's room since the soft crying had faded in the night. He had not gone to the door. He had not spoken through it. Some hurts did not need questions. They needed space. When the bedroom door finally opened, the sound was so small Luke almost missed it. Clara stepped into the kitchen in the same gray dress, though her hair was neater now, parted and pinned with careful hands. The bruise on her cheek looked darker in the morning light. She stopped when she saw him by the stove. "There's coffee," Luke said. "Biscuits too. They're not much to look at, but they won't bite." For the first time, Clara's mouth moved into the faintest smile. It was gone almost as soon as it came, but Luke saw it. He turned away so she would not feel watched. She poured herself coffee and sat at the far end of the table. They ate in silence at first. Not the hard kind of silence, not the kind that squeezes the air from a room. This one was easier. Luke let it stay easy. After a while, Clara looked toward the window. "It's quiet here." Luke nodded, "Mostly." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "I like that." He wanted to ask her 100 things. Who hurt you? Who wrote that note? What secret are you carrying under your dress on that chain? But he asked none of them. Instead he said, "There's water in the wash basin if you want to freshen up. And if you'd rather rest today, that's fine too." Clara lowered her eyes. "I'm not lazy, Mr. Harper." Luke set down his biscuit. "I didn't say you were." Her fingers tightened around the cup. For a second she looked ashamed, like she had spoken wrong. Luke softened his voice. "You don't have to earn every mouthful in this house." That made her still. She stared at him as if he had said something she had never heard from any man in her life. Then she nodded once and looked away. The morning passed with small things. Luke went out to feed the horses and check the north fence. Clara swept the kitchen, wiped down the shelves, and shook dust from the rugs on the porch. When Luke came back with a bucket of water from the pump, he found the windows open and the room smelling of sun and clean wood. His mother's old blue plate, which had sat tucked away in a cabinet for years, was set on the table with 2 spoons beside it. He did not remember telling Clara where it was. She noticed him looking. "I hope that was all right." Luke set the bucket down. It was. By afternoon the heat rose hard off the ground. Clara stood at the sink rolling up her sleeves to wash beans for supper. Luke was in the doorway mending a broken harness strap when he saw her flinch at the sound of hoofbeats on the road. Her head turned fast toward the window. Her hand slipped and the bowl nearly fell. Luke stood up at once and looked outside. It was only old Mr. Benson from the next spread, riding past with 2 calves trailing behind him. "He won't stop," Luke said. Clara did not answer. Her breathing was short and shallow. Luke walked to the front door and rested one hand on the frame. "No one comes in here without my say." Slowly the fear eased from her face. But not all of it. That evening they ate stew at the kitchen table while the sky turned red outside. Clara tasted a spoonful, then looked at him. "You were right. It's still fine." Luke gave a small shrug. "Told you." She took another bite. "It's good." He almost laughed at the surprise in her voice, but he held it back. "That may be the first kind thing anyone said about my cooking." Clara lowered her spoon. "Then people haven't been honest with you." Luke looked at her, and this time she really did smile. It was brief but warm enough to change the room. Over the next days, the ranch began to find a rhythm around her. Clara rose early. She kneaded bread with quick, sure hands. She stitched a torn shirt of Luke's so neatly the rip almost vanished. She watered the patch of herbs behind the kitchen and stood long at the edge of the corral, watching the horses move through dust and sunlight. Luke noticed she never stood with her back to an open door. He noticed she jumped at loud voices, even from far off. He noticed she slept with the lamp burning low in her room until dawn. He noticed, too, that under all that fear was steel. On the 5th day, Luke came in from the barn and found Clara sitting at the table with a small leather book open in front of her. She shut it so fast he only caught a glimpse of names and dates written in neat lines. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you." Her hand stayed on the book. "You didn't." Luke hung his hat on the peg. "Didn't know you kept a journal." "It's not a journal." He waited, but she said no more. He nodded toward the book. "Something important." Clara looked down at it. For a long moment her face went distant, like she had stepped into another room inside her own mind. "Yes," she said at last. "Very." Luke did not ask again. But that night, long after she had gone to her room, he sat on the porch with the stars overhead and thought about the chain at her throat and the book she guarded like a loaded pistol. A bruise could come from one kind of trouble. That kind of fear came from something deeper. The next Saturday they rode into Dry Creek for supplies. Clara sat beside him in the wagon, hands folded over her gloves, eyes watching the town come closer. Luke could feel her grow tense with every yard. "You don't have to get down," he said. "I can fetch what we need." She looked at the mercantile, then at the hotel across the street, then at the men standing outside the saloon. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "No, I can do it." Luke tied the mare and walked with her into town, not beside her, not crowding, just close enough that she would know he was there. Inside the mercantile, Mrs. Weller greeted them with a bright smile and too much curiosity in her eyes. "So this is your bride, Luke." Clara went stiff. Luke answered before she had to. "This is Clara Harper." The name seemed to land hard in the air. Clara turned and looked at him. He had said it plain, like it had always belonged to her. Mrs. Weller beamed. "Well, welcome to Dry Creek, Mrs. Harper." Clara gave a small nod, but her eyes had changed. Luke saw it and said nothing. They bought flour, coffee, lamp oil, and cloth. Clara added a slate pencil and 2 cheap school primers to the counter, then looked almost embarrassed by them. "You teach?" Luke asked as they stepped back outside. "I used to help at a church school in Missouri," she said. "Before." "Before what?" She looked down the street where dust moved in little circles under the sun. "Before everything else." Luke climbed into the wagon and held out a hand to help her up. She hesitated, then placed her fingers in his. Her hand was cold despite the heat. On the ride home, she was quiet for a long time. Then she reached beneath her dress and pulled out the chain he had seen before. Hanging from it was a small brass key. Luke kept his eyes on the road. "This is why they said I lie," Clara said softly. Because I took something that was never meant to leave that house. He said nothing. Her fingers closed around the key. And if the man looking for it ever finds me, he won't stop at another bruise. The wagon rolled on through the red evening light. Luke's hands tightened on the reins, but his voice stayed calm. Then he won't find you alone. Clara turned toward him with fear in her eyes, and beneath it, something even more dangerous. Hope. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I'm really curious to know. That night the wind moved softly around the house, brushing the walls like a warning that had not yet found its voice. Clara lay awake in her room with the brass key pressed into her palm so tightly it left a mark. She had not meant to tell Luke as much as she had. But something about the way he listened, without pushing, without trying to pull her story out by force, had loosened the knot inside her. Still, telling part of the truth had only made the rest feel heavier. Before dawn, she heard boots on the porch and the low sound of a man checking the latch on the front door. Luke, not barging in, not asking questions. Just making sure the house was secure before the day began. Clara closed her eyes for a moment and let herself breathe. At breakfast, the sky outside was pale and clear. Luke poured coffee, then set a plate in front of her without a word. Clara looked tired. Luke looked steady. Between them sat all the things not yet spoken. At last Clara touched the key at her throat. "My father kept a lockbox," she said quietly. "He was bookkeeper for a railroad man in Missouri, a cruel one, the kind who smiled in church and ruined families by Tuesday." She stared at the table as she spoke. "My father found proof he was stealing land claims and bribing judges. Names, dates, signed papers, enough to ruin him." Luke listened without moving. "When my father said he would take it to the law, he died 2 days later." Clara's voice did not break, but it grew thinner. "They said it was fever. It wasn't fever." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "After that, the railroad man took me into his house, said it was charity. It wasn't charity either." Luke's jaw hardened. "I found the key hidden in my father's Bible before they buried him. Later I found where it fit. The box held copies of the papers." She swallowed. "I took them and ran. I sent the originals to a pastor my father trusted. I kept the copies hidden. If anything happened to me, I wanted there to be a second set." "The book," Luke said. Clara nodded. "Names and places where the papers were sent. Enough to lead a bad man straight to them if he got his hands on it." Luke sat back slowly. The room felt very still. "So the note came with you because someone thinks you still have it," he said. "Yes." "And the man looking for you?" "He works for the railroad man." Clara lifted her eyes to his. "He is not my husband, not my brother, just the one they send when fear needs a face." Luke held her gaze. "What's his name?" "Frank Doyle." Luke nodded once as if fixing it in place. 2 days later, Frank Doyle came to the ranch. The afternoon had gone strangely quiet before he arrived. No bird song, no wind, just heat sitting heavy on the land. Luke was at the corral when he saw the rider in the distance. A dark coat, dark hat, a straight-back seat that carried too much confidence. Trouble rode a certain way, and this man rode like he had never doubted his right to bring it with him. Luke left the gate open behind him and walked toward the house. Clara was on the porch with a basket of mending. She saw his face and stood at once. "Inside," he said. Her hands tightened on the basket. "It's him." Luke looked at her. "Inside, Clara." For 1 second she looked ready to argue. Then she saw something in his eyes and obeyed, stepping into the house but stopping just behind the screen door where she could still see the yard. Frank Doyle rode up slow, like a man visiting neighbors. He was lean, clean-shaven, and dressed too fine for the dust around him. His smile was small and mean, the kind that never reached the eyes. "Afternoon," he called. Luke said nothing. Frank swung down from his horse and dusted his sleeve. "I'm looking for a woman. Clara Bennett, though she has a habit of changing what belongs to her." "She's not yours to look for," Luke said. Frank's smile did not move. "Now that's where you're wrong. She took property from my employer, valuable papers. She also ran, without permission, from a house where she was being cared for." Behind the screen door, Clara went pale, but she did not step back. Luke planted his boots in the dirt. "You can turn around." Frank glanced toward the house. "I'd rather hear it from her." The screen door opened. Clara stepped out onto the porch. Her fear was there, Luke could see it, but it no longer bent her. It stood beside her now, and she stood taller than it. Frank looked up at her and gave a soft, mocking laugh. "There she is." Clara gripped the porch rail. "You should leave." "You don't give orders, Clara." She drew in a breath. "I do now." Something sharp flashed in Frank's eyes. He took one step toward the porch. Luke moved in front of him so fast the man stopped cold. "You heard her," Luke said. Frank's smile vanished. "Careful, Cowboy, you don't know what trouble she brought you." Luke's voice stayed low. "I know enough." Frank looked from Luke to Clara and back again, weighing his chances. "The papers belong to powerful men. You think this patch of dirt and a fence line will keep them out?" "No," Clara said, her voice stronger now. "But the truth won't stay buried forever." Frank's eyes snapped to her. "You still have them." Clara said nothing. That was answer enough. Frank lunged. He moved toward the porch, but Luke hit him hard in the chest before he reached the first step. The two men crashed into the dust. Frank was quick and mean, throwing elbows and fists with the easy habit of a man used to hurting people smaller than himself. Luke was stronger. He took a blow to the mouth, another to the ribs, then drove Frank back with one crushing punch that sent him sprawling near the horse trough. Frank staggered up, blood on his lip, and reached for the pistol at his belt. Clara gasped. Luke froze for half a breath. Then a shotgun clicked. All three turned. Old Sheriff Tom Reeves stood by the gate with both hands on the gun, his horse still blowing from a hard ride. Behind him came Reverend Cole in a buggy, and beside him sat Mrs. Weller, tight-faced and angry as a storm. Sheriff Reeves spit into the dirt. "Heard enough from the road to know I came just in time." Frank straightened slowly, his hand lifting away from his pistol. Reeves looked at Clara. "Ma'am, you willing to make a statement?" Clara stared at him. At the sheriff, at the reverend, at the woman from the mercantile who had once welcomed her to town. For a long second she looked like a person standing at the edge of a river, unsure if the crossing would hold. Then she stepped down from the porch. "Yes," she said. What followed moved faster than fear expected. Clara brought out the leather book. Reverend Cole confirmed he had received a packet of papers weeks before from a woman signing only with her initials. Sheriff Reeves read the names inside and went grim. By sunset, Frank Doyle was in irons in the back of the sheriff's wagon, and a telegram was already on its way to federal men in Tucson. When the yard finally emptied and the dust settled, the ranch fell into a silence so deep it almost felt holy. Luke stood by the porch, one eye swelling dark, a cut split across his mouth. Clara came to him carrying a clean cloth and a basin of water. He sat without protest while she cleaned the blood from his face. "You should have let me hit him first," she said softly. Luke gave a tired half smile. "Didn't seem polite." She laughed then, a real laugh. It came quick and bright and surprised them both. The sound of it seemed to lift something from the air. When she finished, her hand stayed near his cheek for a moment longer than needed. "You believed me before you knew the whole story," she said. Luke looked at her. "I believed the bruise." Clara's eyes filled, though the tears did not fall. No one ever did before. He covered her hand with his own. They should have. The sun sank low behind the Arizona hills, painting the land gold and red. Clara sat beside him on the porch steps, their shoulders touching at last. Not by accident, not by fear, by choice. After a long while she reached into her pocket and placed the brass key in his hand. "I won't need this anymore," she said. Luke turned it over in his palm, then closed her fingers back around it. "Keep it." She looked at him. "It got you here," he said. "That key opened more than a box." Clara's mouth trembled into a smile. "You always talk like this when your lip is bleeding." "Only on special occasions." The light faded. One by one the first stars appeared above the ranch. The house behind them no longer felt like a place borrowed from hope. It felt lived in. Claimed. Safe. Clara leaned her head against Luke's shoulder. I think I was afraid, she whispered, that if I ever stopped running, the past would catch me. Luke rested his cheek lightly against her hair. Maybe it did. She drew back slightly, searching his face. He looked at the wide, dark land, then back at her. Only now it has to answer to us. Clara let out a slow breath, the kind a person saves for the end of a long storm. Then she looked toward the house, toward the lamplight in the kitchen window, toward the life waiting just inside. Our home, she said. Luke smiled, small and true. Our home. And in the quiet that followed, with the desert night settling soft around them and the worst of the past finally losing ground, Clara Bennett understood what safety really was. It was not just a locked door. It was not distance. It was not hiding. It was being seen, being believed, and being loved without fear. On the porch of a ranch she had never known existed, beside a cowboy who had offered her shelter before asking for anything in return, Clara finally stopped looking over her shoulder. For the first time in years, she looked ahead.